This Christmas, children have had fun choosing a Christmassy text to read to others. Their teachers have recorded them and their videos have been put together by Dorset Council to share with others over the festive period. We hope you enjoy hearing their stories. We wish you a Merry Christmas and a happy and healthy New Year. Love from all the children in Chesil schools.
Today I'm going to read Mog's Christmas. One day, Mog woke up and nothing was right in her house. Everybody was busy. Debbie was busy, Nicky was busy, Mr. and Mrs. Thomas were busy, and there were too many people in the house. There was a jolly uncle and 2 aunts on tippy-toe. Mog thought, I don't like it here. She went and sat outside on the windowsill. There was nothing to do and no one to play with, so after a while she went back to sleep. Suddenly she woke up. She saw something. It was a tree. It was a walking tree. Mog thought, trees don't walk. Trees should stay in one place. Once trees start walking about, anything might happen. She ran up the side of her house in case the tree should come and get her. Come down, shouted the tree. Come down, Mog. First it walks, thought Mog, and now it's shouting at me. I do not like that tree at all. And she ran right up to the roof. The tree went on shouting for a while. Then it went into the house. Mog stayed on the roof. Some white things fell out of the sky. Some fell on the roof and some fell on Mog. They were very cold. At supper time, Mog was still on the roof. She must have had her supper, said Debbie. Mog always has her supper. Mrs. Thomas gave Mog her supper, but still Mog did not come down. In the morning, Mog did not come down either. She had found a nice tall place and she was asleep. She was having a lovely dream. Mog dreamed that she was sitting on a cloud. Some white things were falling out of the sky. Mog tried to catch them. She was very happy. But suddenly the cloud began to melt. Inside the house, everyone was sad, because Mog would not come down. They were too sad to eat their breakfast. Even the jolly uncle was sad, and one of the aunts cried. Suddenly there was a noise. It was a noise in the chimney, and then something came down it, and fell into the fireplace with a thump. It's Father Christmas, cried one of the aunts. No, dear, said the other aunt. Father Christmas does not have a tail. Debbie cried, It's Mog! Mog had to have a bath, but then everything was lovely. The whole house was lovely. The tree had stopped walking about and had made itself all pretty, and Mog had 3 boiled eggs and some turkey, and a present to unwrap. Happy Christmas, Mog, said Debbie.
I'm reading The Christmas by Tom Fletcher. The Hunter. It was Christmas Eve, and William was getting ready for bed unusually early, as all children should on Christmas Eve, but not before placing a mince pie for the reindeer and a carrot for Santa on the wonky little wooden table by the chimney. I bet you thought Santa eats the mince pies and the reindeer eat the carrots, but that's the most common Christmas Eve mistake, as Mr. Trundle would knowingly say each year. Mr. Trundle tucked William into bed, and although he desperately wanted to stay awake for as long as possible, he was so worn out with Christmas excitement he fell fast asleep within 0.8 seconds of his head touching the pillow. William managed to stay awake a little longer, but eventually they were both fast asleep. As William lay snoozing, dreaming Christmassy dreams in his head, he was completely unaware that those tiny little hairs on his arms and his neck were all standing on end again. They were standing on end again because William was still being watched. Outside, it had been snowing heavily all day. All the rooftops in William Street were thickly coated in white freezing fluff that was as smooth as the icing on a Christmas cake. All except one rooftop, whose perfectly fallen snow had been disturbed by something. 2 sets of footprints were scattered around the roof, drawing large circles in the snow. Someone was there, and judging by the hundreds of steps, they must have been pacing back and forth for quite some time. The owners of these footprints were a man and his dog, but they weren't pacing anymore. They were as still as statues, hiding behind the chimney. But what were a man and a dog doing on the rooftop opposite William's house on Christmas Eve? Why had they been spying on William for the past few weeks? And why were they now sitting out of sight in the freezing snow? Who were they? Well, I will tell you. This man was evil. This man was the Hunter. The hunter was an old man with creased leathery skin on his face and a large lumpy white scar that ran from his eye down to his chin. He wore a very odd-looking hunting hat with a long peacock feather sticking proudly out of it. The poor peacock's head was now the handle of an umbrella, and he was also smoking a crooked pipe made of ivory, even in his sleep. Its sickly, bitter smoke hung in the air for hours, and if you were standing next to him, the smoke would sting your nostrils most unpleasantly. The most obvious thing about him, though, was just how incredibly posh he was. He looked posh, smelt posh, walked and talked posh. Even the way he was crouched behind the chimney was posh. In fact, he was so posh that his socks were made of pure gold thread, and he only blew his nose on real £10 notes. The hunter was the eldest son of a very wealthy man, and when his father died, the hunter inherited piles and piles of family gold. He kept it all to himself in a huge vault inside the family mansion, and refused to let anyone else inside. He shut himself away from his family, from the world. Even the annual Christmas cards from distant relatives couldn't drag him away from counting his wealth. He loved money. He loved gold. But most of all, he loved hunting. He started hunting poor, innocent animals when he was a little boy, whilst his filthy rich parents were away on long exotic holidays. He would be left at home with his nanny, who was too busy looking after his perfect baby brother to pay him any attention. First, he hunted the neighbour's cat with a trap made of leftover chopsticks, the one that no one ever uses, from Chinese takeaways. He enjoyed it so much that the next day he set his pet hamster free in the garden hedge maze, then hunted it down with a slingshot made from the neighbour's cat's bones. Then he released his goldfish into the moat and hunted it using a snooker cue from the billiard room as a spear. Back then, when he was little, the hunter was known as Huxley. But one long winter holiday at home from boarding school, he managed to track and hunt every single animal in a 12-mile radius of the family mansion. From then on, he became known only as the hunter. Huxley was no more. Over the years, the animals he liked to hunt had become more and more exotic, and the more rare the animal, the more he wanted to kill it. He'd hunted lions and tigers, bears and monkeys, zebras and giraffes, but they weren't anywhere near rare enough for the hunter anymore. He liked to hunt these ridiculously rare animals, creatures so rare that most people had never heard of them, but they're all very real. He had the horn of a unicorn, which he'd hunted in the glaciers of Greenland. He had the paw of a pink polar bear he'd shot with a crossbow at the foot of a rainbow. He had the ears of a pandaroo, the gills of a horse shark, the tail of a snail whale, the tongue of a fangle beast, the snout of a pigfish, and the wings of 20,000 flying ants he'd swatted in Sweden on Flying Ant Day. He hunted creatures of all sorts, and once he'd shot them, he had their heads mounted on the walls of his great mansion. Wherever the hunter went, his loyal dog, Growler, followed. Growler had been the hunter's trusty companion for many, many years. He did anything the hunter told him to, because if he didn't, he knew he would end up as a head on the mansion wall. But why were the hunter and Growler hiding on a rooftop in the snow on Christmas Eve? And why had they been secretly spying on William for the past few weeks? Well, I was just about to tell you before you interrupted me. You see, one Christmas Eve, a very long time ago, when the hunter was still called Huxley, he had seen the most fantastic sight any boy could ever see. He had seen a flying reindeer. His younger brother had heard something in the sky over the mansion. Someone was singing. Then, all of a sudden, a gigantic sleigh had burst through a break in the snow clouds. The little boy had called for his brother, and that's when Huxley had seen them. 9 magnificently magical flying reindeer. Flying reindeer. Flying reindeer. By golly gosh, Huxley had said. Flying reindeer? I don't believe my eyes. They have to be the rarest creatures in the world, exclaimed Huxley's little brother. And they were. I must have one, Huxley had cried. From that night on, the hunter's life had changed. All he thought about, all he wanted, was the head of a magnificently magical flying reindeer hanging upon his wall above the fireplace.
Now it is a fact that there was nothing at all particular about the knocker on the door, except that it was very large. It is also a fact that Scrooge had seen it at night and morning during his whole residence in that place. Also that Scrooge had as little of what is called fancy about him as any man in the city of London, even including, which is a bold word, the corporation, aldermen and livery.
Let it also be borne in mind that Scrooge has not bestowed one thought on Marley since his last mention of his 7 years dead partner that afternoon. And then let any man explain to me, if he can, how it happened that Scrooge, having his key in the lock of the door, saw the knocker without its undergoing any intermediate process of change, not a knocker, but Marley's face.
Marley's face. It was not an impenetrable shadow as the other objects in the yard were, but it had a dismal light about it, like a bad lobster in a dark cellar. It was not angry or ferocious, but looked at Scrooge as Marley used to look, with ghostly spectacles turned up on its ghostly forehead. The hair was curiously stirred, as if any breath of hot air, and through the eyes were wide open. They were perfectly motionless. That and its livid colour made it horrible, but its horror seemed to be, in spite of the face and beyond its control, rather than part of its own expression. As Scrooge looked fixedly at this phenomenon, it was a knocker again.
To say that he was not startled, or that his blood was not conscious of a terrible sensation to which it had been a stranger from infancy, would be untrue. But he put his hand upon the key, had relinquished, turned it sturdily, walked in, and lighted his candle.
He did pause, with a moment's irresolution, before he shut the door, and he did look cautiously behind it first, as if he half expected to be terrified at the sight of Marley's pigtails sticking out into the hall. But there was nothing on the back of the door, except the screws and nuts that had held the knocker on, so he said, "Pooh-pooh." He closed over the back. Sorry.
The sound resounded through the house like thunder. Every room above, and every cask in the wine merchant's cellars below, appeared to have a separate peal of echoes of its own. Scrooge was not a man to be frightened by echoes. He fastened the door and walked across the hall and up the stairs slowly too, trimming his candle as he went.
This is the story of the haunting of Pip Parker. Maybe you're braver than I am. Maybe it wouldn't spoil your Christmas Eve to have to lie awake feeling haunted, instead of drifting off to sleep knowing you'd wake to find yourself stocking full of presents. Maybe you wouldn't mind the night before Christmas being turned into a sort of 2 months late Halloween. I minded a lot. Over there on my desk lay the gifts I'd made or saved to buy and wrapped up for other people.
Down there at the end of my bed, across my feet, lay my big, red, still empty, Christmas stocking. Above my head hung the glittery advent calendar I'd made at school, with only one door left to open, and there on the far wall was what was keeping me awake, the horrible, tiny, golden skull shape that had been shining at me off the wall for the whole week. Maybe you have stronger nerves than I do. I couldn't sleep, and I'm not a baby. I managed well enough when I slept over Great Aunt Belle's, and the branches of her ash tree waved in front of the street light and through the creepiest shadows you've ever seen over the bedroom wall. I was fine at Alex's house too, even if it did take me a bit more time to work out that those weird snaky things that kept flitting across the ceiling were just car headlights turning into Mappin Road.
But here in my own home I was a total wreck. I shut my eyes to go to sleep and had to keep opening them again to see if the skull was still watching me. Not that it had eyes exactly. It was just a shape on the wall, a gleaming shape, about the size of my thumb. But it worried me. I couldn't take my eyes off it, and so I couldn't get to sleep. And all week I'd been going around like a zombie, too tired to eat, too tired even to think. And they all kept asking me things. My father, my mother, my elder brother and sister, and Uncle Edward. "Pip, what do you want for Christmas? Are you short of any winter clothes, darling? Pips? What was the name of that rather nasty plastic thing you saw in the shop window and liked so much? It's Granny on the phone. She wants to know if Pip likes poetry. Do you like poetry, Pip? Simply as a matter of interest, Pip. Did you ever find your bike chain?" I tried to concentrate. After all, I know as well as you do that it's important to keep your wits about you when people are asking you this sort of question in the last few days before Christmas. Too many wrong answers, and you can fetch up with a pile of junk.
But I was too sleepy to think, and yawning so hard I couldn't answer anyway. Pip, there's only a couple of days left. Please give us a few ideas. What sort of things would you like? Books, clothes, pens, cassettes, computer stuff? Already I was deep in another yawn. Pip! I made a real effort, but all I wanted for Christmas was to stop being haunted, and that's what I told them. All I want for Christmas is for someone to get rid of that horrible thing on my bedroom wall. There's nothing on your wall. Oh yes, there is. No, there isn't. It's all your imagination. 3 times the whole lot of us have trooped upstairs to look for it for you, and every single time there was nothing there. It came back as soon as you'd gone. Nonsense, Pip.
Just your imagination. Too much cheese. I can't help it. When I get tired, I get scratchy-tempered. That's just the way I am. I need my sleep. And so, all through last week, when they kept asking me, have you decided what you want for Christmas yet? I kept saying over and over, though I knew how it was annoying them, all I want for Christmas is a nice blank wall. You could hear their voices going all frosty. Right then, I suppose it will just have to be a surprise. No one believed me. Nobody offered to come up and have another look. And I could see their point. After all, it was true that they'd been up 3 times already, 3 evenings in a row. When I came down in my pyjamas to complain, they'd all laid their drinks down with a sigh and trooped up the stairs one after another, moaning. I'll tell you Pip's problems. Too much television. Have you been eating cheese, dear? Cheese gives you the most vivid dreams.